man. Don't touch that dial.
Hey, don't touch that dial.
People need to wake up.
Today's News Talk, TNT.
Welcome back, folks. Welcome back. We're in hour number 2, this live broadcast. I'm Patrick Henningsen, your host. This is TNT, Today's News Talk. Listen, we're going to shift gears right now for a world update. What are the hot topics? What are the hot stories? What do we need to know? There's no better person to bring on the call right now than TNT's political editor, Mr. Basil Valentine, is joining us right now on the live link. Basil, how are you?
Very well, thank you, Patrick. Great to be with you, and hello to our viewers and listeners all around the world.
Has it not been an eventful weekend? I mean, we came into Monday with an avalanche of major stories. The Iranian story, obviously, that's huge. The ICC arrest warrants finally against the Israeli leadership, that's pretty big. And also the Julian Assange appeal, a bit of good news for a change. So we've had a big start to the week, Basil. The ICC Israeli case, though, this thing looks like it's got legs. It certainly evoked a reflexive reaction from U.S. political leaders. They're not very happy about this. Netanyahu is kicking and screaming. I think we've got a clip of him. If we do have that clip, let's roll that. I want to get your reaction to this one, Basil.
He's creating a false symmetry between the democratically elected leaders of Israel and the terrorist chieftains. That's like saying after 9/11, well, I'm issuing arrest warrants for George Bush, but also for bin Laden. Or after in World War II, well, I'm issuing arrest warrants for FDR, but also for Hitler. It's a hit job. It's not serious. He's out to defame Israel, and he's also pouring gasoline on the fires of anti-Semitism that are spreading around the world, because he is attacking the one and only Jewish state and trying to handcuff us, preventing us from exercising responsibly through the laws of war as we obey them and we are subordinate to them. He's saying we're not. He's creating false symmetry, false facts, and he's doing a grave injustice to the international court.
I mean, look, there's a lot to unpack there, but did he just say the quiet part out loud about indicting George Bush for 9/11? I mean, that was something there. That would be a trick,
I mean,
wouldn't it?
Comparison is completely and utterly ludicrous. He also said at the top, democratically elected. Well, just because you're democratically elected, that doesn't mean you can't commit genocide. You know, so what if you were elected? You were only elected by the Israeli population. The Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza are deprived of a vote for the people that effectively control their lives. So, I mean, it was just almost laughable, but the chutzpah of the man is absolutely off the charts. Ironically, of course, Gazans are saying quite the opposite. They also see a false equivalence in the ICC charges, but from the other side. Did Hamas use planes to bomb Tel Aviv? Did they kill 35,000 people and still thousands more are missing? This is insane. The world is unjust. They see with one eye. How come they equate between us and the occupation? Said Samed, a mother of 6, displaced by the war between different neighborhoods of Gaza City. And she's absolutely right. The scale of violence and suffering unleashed by the Israelis is many, many, many times over whatever happened on October the 7th, which, of course, the Israelis like to portray as somehow being the start of history, but was itself a reaction to decades of apartheid, regular mowing the lawn. What an obscene phrase to use for bombing innocent civilians. So, you know, it's starting to unravel, though, for Netanyahu. I mean, he does still have the lockstep support of the senile Biden and the supine Rishi Sunak and David Cameron. I mean, I'd like to know what the Israelis have got on the likes of Sunak and Cameron and Biden, for that matter, that they keep on spouting this utterly immoral, indefensible, unethical garbage, because quite simply, they too may be complicit. A very good article in Declassified today by Mark Curtis, quite rightly saying that the ICC must investigate British ministers for complicity in the Gaza genocide. The UK is not only providing arms to Israel. We've discovered this. UK government had 28 extant and 28 pending high-risk licenses with Israel marked as most likely to be used by the IDF in offensive operations in Gaza. Remember, on October the 18th, Israeli forces bombed a residential compound in Gaza, housing the emergency medical team of Medical Aid for Palestinians, a British charity. 4 British doctors were injured in that airstrike, alongside other Medical Aid for Palestinians staff members and a bodyguard. That particular attack was carried out by an F-16 jet, components for which have been supplied by UK companies. Now, UK ministers enjoy Crown immunity. They cannot be prosecuted for their individual actions, which is why we've never been able to bring a civil case against the likes of Tony Blair. And likewise, there's no chance of bringing cases in UK courts against the likes of Sunak and Cameron, but they cannot dodge the ICC, much as they'd like to. I mean, to me, Patrick, we are in, I've said this before, but it's becoming even more acute. We are in a global constitutional crisis. You know, it seems that people like the Prime Minister Sunak, who was in Austria today, dismissing with a wave of the hand the ICC preliminary request. It's worth remembering that these arrest warrants have not yet been issued. The prosecutor is applying to a panel of judges who will then decide whether or not there is sufficient merit in the case he presents to issue the arrest warrants. We're not there yet, but it is expected that they will be issued. But, as I say, the likes of Sunak dismissing it, Biden obviously condemning even this action. And they don't have any evidence. They seem to think that politicians are above the law, that politicians can simply dismiss international courts. And if we end up going down that road, then we're basically going to be living in a gangster world, Patrick.
Well, many would argue that we're already there, but what do you think about, the naysayers are saying this is, meaningless. It's, it's not even symbolic. Israel's not a signatory to the Rome Statute. They don't recognize the ICC. Neither does the United States. And of course, neither does Russia or China for that matter, or Iran. But Britain does, and all of Europe does. And does that mean, Basil, that the Netanyahu and Youav, the human animal Gallant, will not be able to step foot in any of these countries that do recognize the ICC and would be compelled to act on an arrest warrant should any of these characters step foot within their jurisdiction? I mean, isn't that quite a major symbolic, significant thing? Because it means that their travels now are restricted to really a handful of countries around the world.
Yeah, if indeed the arrest warrants are issued against Netanyahu and Gallant, and as I said, they haven't been yet, then first of all, under international law, the fact that Israel is not a signatory to the ICC is irrelevant. The Rome statutes dictate that all countries where such offences are being committed and people are suitably accused can be arrested and tried. ICC don't have the power to sort of invade Israel with international policemen, with Interpol or something, and start arresting people. But you're absolutely right. If the arrest warrants are issued and Gallant or Netanyahu set foot in any of the European countries or any other country anywhere in the world that is a signatory to the ICC, then those countries are duty bound to arrest them. That's why Putin didn't go to South Africa recently, because South Africa is a signatory to the ICC, of course. So for all the wailing and gnashing of teeth from Netanyahu, and for that matter, all the naysayers who say this is symbolic or meaningless or something, on the contrary, this is extremely significant. Everybody said Karen Khan was sitting on his hands, that he was compromised, that he was very much the NATO-Israel choice for chief prosecutor. It's taken him months and months to even get to this point, but he was quite forthright when He spoke earlier this week about the reasons why and the charges against Netanyahu and Gallant. But Biden, of course, says there is no genocide. I mean, if there's no genocide in Gaza, I'd like to know what he thinks a genocide looks like. So, you know, where you've got a situation, well, we haven't had a situation like this before. This is the key thing, Patrick. We've never been in a situation where a country wholeheartedly supported by the European Union, by the United States, by the UK, has been accused in this way. It's always been somebody else, whether an African dictator or Slobodan Milosevic or Vladimir Putin. Very easy for the press and everything to demonize those people, to support the ICC, to say what dreadful people they are, butchers must be arrested and all the rest of it. Now we're in a situation where, you know, this colonial project in the Middle East is in the hot seat, and it's a very, very different situation from any we've had before.
So what I think is extraordinary here, Basil, is the contrast now. You know, a big you know, production was made over the indictments of Vladimir Putin and the other Russian official, claiming that they're guilty of the mass abduction of children from the Donbass or Ukraine. And if you look at the charges there, they're extremely weak. It's hard to find out what the actual crime is. It's all how it was framed. Moving children out of a war zone was then deemed to be kidnapping, according to the ICC. So there's a lot of challenges to that. Looking at these charges with regards to Israel, the evidence is pretty overwhelming, not to mention you've got the whole ICJ genocide convention case going on in the 80-something page document and so forth. I mean, there's no shortage of evidence to indict Israeli officials, military, and whatnot. So that contrast is there. But if the U.S. and some of these countries work to block this, then isn't there a danger, Basil, that this issue could actually destroy the International Criminal Court, its legitimacy, its reputation, if they cannot get any justice on what is one of the first examples, as you said, Basil? This is like a genocide in real time. This isn't going into the jungles of Rwanda trying to get witness statements a year after the fact. We've watched it live streamed on our phones. So this is a big challenge, isn't it, to the international system of whether they can actually make justice happen.
Oh, absolutely. The biggest challenge to international law in our lifetimes, Patrick, by quite a long way. You know, the United States likes to talk about the rules-based order. Well, it seems that it's a case of we make the rules and we order you to follow them. And it's quite obvious that the United States has been making up the rules as it goes along. There can be no question that it is failing 100% to apply universal standards. You know, Israel is not judged by the standards of any other country anywhere in the world. And we have to ask ourselves why. And if you've got an answer, then please let me know. You know, Kenneth Roth says the demand for solid evidence is why Khan began with Israel's starvation strategy, because the evidence is readily available. Israel has barred his investigators, the ICC investigators from Gaza, where he would ordinarily want to investigate Israel's indiscriminate and disproportionate bombing. Khan has made clear that his investigation continues and more charges could come. And interesting, a little vignette, Amal Clooney, of course, the human rights lawyer, wife of George Clooney, has apparently played a key role in the decision to seek this international arrest warrant for Prime Minister Netanyahu. The British human rights law was on a panel advising Karim Khan, the ICC prosecutor, but has previously, of course, been criticised on social media for not speaking out about the war crimes, talking about everything else. So perhaps that's why, perhaps she felt she needed to maintain judicial independence and avoid being accused of bias. Netanyahu, of course, there in that clip we heard, trotting out all the usual tropes about anti-Semitism, but it isn't washing with the world public anymore. They might still be buying it on Capitol Hill. I mean, both sides of the aisle seem to be united in their opprobrium at this. But the key point is this: they don't have any right to be. You know, we're not politicians are not supposed to comment on legal matters. You know, legal matters are above effectively the pay grade of politicians. They should simply say, you know, the ICC must continue its investigation and we will abide by whatever findings they come to. Saying, oh, just Israel isn't guilty of genocide and coming out with other stuff. I mean, it's like friends of a murderer, let's say somebody who's murdered his wife or something, you know, standing outside the courtroom saying, oh, we know that he didn't do it because he's our mate. You know, this is all a show trial. This is nonsense. I'm trying to intimidate the judges and the witnesses and the jury. You know, that is the equivalent that the current situation is. It's absolutely disgraceful.
And to pull the anti-Semitic card, not surprised he pulled it. It's almost like an obligatory addition to caveat to any charge or accusation or criticism of Israel. But to say that these indictments somehow are anti-Semitic or that the International Criminal Court is an anti-Semitic institution, that's kind of like the direction they're going in. I mean, didn't they already do this with the United Nations? So, and again, they're sort of flogging that dead horse. And in a way, they're kind of hastening the redundancy of that charge right across the board. I mean, right now, it's lost so much of its sting, hasn't it? This accusation of, quote, anti-Semitism. Is it one egg too many for that omelet, Basil?
Well, personally, I think it was some time ago. I mean, the way Netanyahu flings that term around when an increasing number of Jewish people, particularly in the United States, particularly young Jewish people, as we saw in the campus protests, as well as in the UK, want to wash their hands of the Israeli government. Ironically, it is Netanyahu himself who is being anti-Semitic because he is tarring all Jewish people worldwide with the blood-stained brush of Zionism. Simple as that. That itself is anti-Semitic. Zionism and Judaism are not the same thing, and increasing numbers of Jewish people repudiate Zionism. Meanwhile, we have non-Jewish people, Gentiles, Biden, Sunak, Cameron, etc., who seem to be hurrying to embrace Netanyahu's bloody hand. So it's a nonsense. We've got to, once and for all, divorce the idea that just because Zionism is, as a political ideology, originated with Jewish people, that somehow it represents all Jewish people and criticisms of it are anti-Semitic. It's utter nonsense.
Yeah, good to point that out. Obviously, this is getting discussed a lot more, especially on social media. So it's good to see the conversation maturing on this issue. When before it was just verboten even to have a discussion about this. It was so loaded politically before, but now it's conversations opened up a little bit. I think that's overall generally healthy. I think everybody recognizes, Basil, that what we're seeing is a historic injustice, a crime against humanity on a scale that many of us have not witnessed before in our lifetimes in such a short space of time. Well, I mean, it would be
like saying that criticizing the perpetrators of the Rwanda genocide is anti-Black racism. Of course not.
Good point.
So it's going nowhere, that argument. And it's really very disappointing that anybody gives it any credence. You know, Netanyahu was talking about how the ICC, apparently, according to him, the fact that the ICC is seeking his arrest warrant fuels the flames of anti-Semitism worldwide. I would have said quite the opposite. If people can see that there is such a thing as international law and the perpetrators of genocide will be arrested for their crimes, that can only have a calming effect on relationships between communities. If, on the other hand, it's seen that one group of people, namely Israeli Zionists, are somehow above the law worldwide and can carry out genocide with impunity, that is much more likely to fuel anti-Semitism, Patrick.
Good point. Again, great point you make there, Basil. We want to talk about the Iranian tragedy over the weekend, but there's other breaking news stories we'd like to get your comment on. Appreciate you staying for this overdrive segment, Basil.
Not at all, Patrick. I'm very glad to be able to stay with you. And just sort of pivoting away from the ICC situation, of course, there's also the big question of what happens next in Gaza when the annihilation finally stops. And Jack Lew, the US ambassador to Tel Aviv, has been talking about that. And bubbling away in the background is a big deal, the grand bargain, it's been called, which Biden is trying to foster, which involves normalization of Israeli-Saudi relations, but also some kind of new self-governance for the Palestinian people. Now, the Israelis want to have nothing to do with that because they don't want to have anything to do with anything that talks about a Palestinian state. So, this push coming to shove, this, perhaps irresistible force, perhaps it'll be dissipated, meeting the immovable object of Israeli intransigence to a Palestinian state, something we've been talking about on this program as on the horizon endlessly, year after year, month after month, and that October the 7th would finally see this come about more quickly. Well, Jack Lew's been talking about it and saying that there's going to have to be some period of quiet, I think, in Gaza, and there's going to have to be a conversation about how you deal with the question of the future of Palestinian governance. Blinken himself has said that he wants to see a concrete plan from Netanyahu. My view, said Jack Lew, is that strategic benefit is worth taking the risk of getting into that conversation. He means about Palestinian governance. But that's a decision that the government of Israel will have to make and the people of Israel will have to make. He was speaking at a conference hosted by the Israel Democracy Institute, the IDI think tank. No irony in that title. But I mean, isn't it interesting that Lew is there talking about how it's a decision for the government and people of Israel what happens in Gaza? Isn't it for the self-determination, one of the key tenets of the international rules-based order? Isn't that what the United States is supposed to stand for? So why is it Israel that gets to decide what happens in Gaza?
And the West Bank too, and full stop. This is an old story. They've been bandying about the two-state solution when most Israelis, Basil, and they admit privately and now publicly they have no intention of ever allowing an independent Palestinian state. And even then, what state would it be, Basil, realistically? A patchwork of small pieces of land woven together by this intricate system of Israeli security highways for military, no airport, no control over its utilities, its water, power, airspace, communications for that matter, and certainly its borders. So, I mean, the Palestinian state that Israel wants is the status quo. And look what happened with the status quo. Look at Gaza right now. Northern Gaza is basically a parking lot. That's Israel's contribution to a Palestinian state.
Absolutely. And of course, some of the more extreme factions in the Israeli government have talked about settling Gaza, about driving the remaining Palestinians out. I would imagine that what's on Netanyahu's drawing board is to take a chunk of Gaza in the name of security always. Mm-hmm. He's managed to herd the majority of the population into the south in the most inhumane and brutal way imaginable. And I think his plan would probably be for the Gazans to be reduced to a third of the previous territory in and around Rafah and very largely expelled from the rest. So just a sort of micro block, if you like, a few city blocks of Palestinian people on the edge of the border with Egypt. The United States yesterday described as near final a bilateral defense pact with Saudi Arabia. And once completed, the idea is that this will be part of a broad deal presented to Netanyahu to decide whether to make concessions to secure a normalization of ties with Riyadh. Those concessions, of course, have to be to the Palestinians, because Riyadh is making noises along the lines that there's no full normalization with Israel unless there are concessions to the Palestinians, regardless of any bilateral defense pact with the United States. But as we know, a ceasefire is still elusive, and Netanyahu says it is premature to discuss what happens the day after. I mean, personally, I find the whole framing of this conversation absolutely obscene. The Palestinians are sort of not front and central in this debate. They seem to be regarded as, well, an inconvenience. They're an inconvenience to the United States. They're an inconvenience to, obviously, Israel, and they're even an inconvenience to the Saudis, who, for some reason, have finally been moved to, make some kind of milk toast representation on their behalf, Patrick.
Yes, and the other thing that's going to get revived, unfortunately, that sort of turd in the punch bowl called the Abraham Accords. The Trump campaign is making that sort of centerpiece of their pitch to voters for the 2024, Basil, basically saying that, elect us, and we brought peace to the Middle East with the Abraham Accords, and Biden brought war. Elect us and we'll bring the Arab countries and Saudi Arabia back into the fold. No mention of the Palestinians at all in the Abraham Accords. It's kind of like a runaround to any real negotiations. What are your thoughts on the Trump campaign still leaning on the Abraham Accords as a big sort of, Kushner brokered success story?
Well, of course, that bizarre map that Kushner produced for a sort of two-state solution. Well, I mean, looking back, it was better than what's happened since, wouldn't it? Yeah, I mean, Trump's main line is that none of this would have happened if he had remained president, because he's sort of so much a better negotiator and all the rest of it. But he doesn't really offer anything different. He made, when Netanyahu visited Washington during the Trump presidency, Trump made an off-the-cuff remark about slowing up the settlements and was rebuked even for that, if you remember. So, the Palestinian people don't hold out any hope for a Trump presidency, put it that way. It's going absolutely nowhere as far as they're concerned. The main thing with all this, really, the backstory is that I don't think the Israelis, or the Americans for that matter, realize the corner that they've painted themselves into with this genocide with the rest of the world. I think the Israelis and Washington somehow think that, this will all settle down and things will go back to normal, and Israel is a valued member of the international community and so on and so forth. But Blinken was on Capitol Hill today, ostensibly to talk about the State Department budget for 2025, and he was hectored and heckled continuously by protesters. Blinken, you will be remembered as the butcher of Gaza, one protester shouted as Capitol police officers threw him out of the hearing. You will be remembered for murdering innocent Palestinian civilians. Lots of other protesters were thrown out in just the same manner. Blinken apparently faced aggressive grilling by Democrats and Republicans alike for the administration's policies and actions towards Israel, specifically its support for Israel throughout the war. Now, I don't expect a huge amount of pushback from anyone on Capitol Hill, but the simple fact is that world opinion, as demonstrated by the ICC, is that Netanyahu, Gallant, and their cohorts are all war criminals. And that Israel, even Chuck Schumer said, is in danger of becoming a pariah state. So this idea that somehow Jack Lew and Netanyahu and Herzog, who's talking about their historic struggle still, and it's not just against Hamas, Herzog said that says that Israel's engaged in a decades-long historic struggle. These people are living a completely different timeline from the rest of the world. There's no going back to normality after this. People are not going to forget. I mean, apart from anything else, you've got tens of thousands of mutilated and severely traumatized children in Gaza. Who is going to look after them once this stops? Right? It's just, very, very arrogant, really, more than anything else, the attitude of the administration.
Yeah, they really, I don't know if they think they have any further to go to push this issue somehow back in their favor. It just seems to be getting worse and worse for Israel, this ICC, these indictments, if these are going to be handed down, the ICJ case, that's in the background, that could drop at any point over the next 8 months. So this is bad news, I think, for I think the U.S. establishment, both Trump and Biden. This is going to weigh heavily on both of them in terms of, it's not so much that there's going to be an advantage. I think probably Trump will get the advantage on this if Democratic voters sit out, Basil, on this just out of protest. Yeah. It's going to benefit
I
Trump.
think he will. Absolutely. I mean, I think he will. I mean, Biden has trashed his own base with his support for the genocide, and a lot of them won't come back. There's no doubt about it. Jill Stein is surging in the polls. She's up to 40% of young voters in some states of 18 to 30s. Now, they may well carry out their threat to vote for her. She could end up with 5 or even 8% of the vote nationally, which would be enough to completely destroy Biden, because although RFK supporters may, some of them may come from Trump as well as from Biden, Jill supporters are all going to be ex-Biden. So, I can't see a way to the presidency again for Biden without some major cheating. Now, I want to do a pivot quickly to the Iranian helicopter crash story. Considering it killed the president and the foreign minister, really disappeared from their headlines remarkably quickly, didn't it, Patrick? At one point it looked like this was going to be a flashpoint, that perhaps the Iranians would be pointing the fingers at Israel, of course, very quickly, and see a further escalation. The timing, certainly as close as it is to the exchange a few weeks ago, is suspicious, if nothing else. But the Iranians are actually pointing the finger elsewhere. They're blaming the sanctions imposed by the United States, the embargo on aviation parts, meaning that they haven't been able to maintain the safety of their aviation fleet. Former Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif argued that US sanctions are indirectly responsible for the tragedy by depriving Iran of the necessary spare parts and safety checks. Not many people have reported that in the corporate media.
Yeah, that's one of those issues. I mean, there's other people that are saying that's a good thing. They're saying, "Oh, look, sanctions are working. They've hurt the Iranians and their helicopters are malfunctioning and killed their president." There's actually people making that argument, like celebrating the tragedy that's happened. I mean, it's, believe it or not. So they're saying, "Oh, this is why we need to keep sanctions going." So obviously some celebrations in Tel Aviv, the likes of Piers Morgan and others are sort of, kind of casting President Raisi as the butcher of Tehran and all these other things. I mean, isn't it amazing how you get these bizarre but kind of very disingenuous reactions from people in the West with anything to do with Iran, Russia, or whatever the axis of evil countries are at the moment. They just automatically demonize the leadership. And from what I understand, this is a very popular president who went out of his way to kind of be, visiting people who are disadvantaged, less fortunate, lower income brackets, very much man of the people, this president, very popular. And next in line is supreme leader. That's an important position in Iran, to be considered as the next supreme leader means that you have to be very well accepted by the broadest possible spectrum of people within the Iranian population. And it looks like Raisi fit the bill there. And so that's a tremendous loss for the country if you consider on the back end of Qasem Soleimani. And there's been so many other, leaders that have been killed or have unfortunately fallen on very bad circumstances, air accidents, etc. I mean, putting conspiracy theories aside, the numbers on this are pretty shocking when it comes to Iranian leaders, people in distinguished positions that have been killed in some of these types of situations. So, I mean, yeah, we could say there is possibly some clandestine motive there to take out leadership in Iran, especially talking about Israel, for instance, the United States, yet to be proven. I don't think there's any evidence to that effect here, but people are they're already getting ahead of that talking point. Actually, Politico issued a story, Basil, saying that this could somehow, if it's blamed on Israel, it could destabilize the region. Don't you think it's kind of strange that getting out ahead of that talking point, if there's no evidence to suggest that that's the case, unless they know something we don't? I don't know.
Well, there's also speculation that an internal power struggle within Iran may ultimately be responsible. Raisi has been seen as a potential successor to Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader. So with him out of the way, it now looks like Mojtaba Khamenei, the supreme leader's son, who is also a candidate for supreme leader when Ali Khamenei finally steps down or dies, he's now the front runner. So people are asking, Abdullahian as well. He had made tremendous gains on the diplomatic front, the foreign minister who also died, Iran being admitted to the BRICS countries, and of course the normalization deal, the peace deal that the Chinese brokered with Saudi Arabia. These are really notable diplomatic successes for the Iranian leadership. And Raisi and Abdullahian had been at the forefront of that. They're the ones that travel, whereas Ali Khamenei and his son tend to stay in Tehran. So I'm not making this up. This is Gabriel Noronha, a former advisor on Iran to the State Department. He's saying that the key takeaway is that Ali Khamenei's son is now far and away the leading candidate to become the next supreme leader. So we don't know. I don't want to accuse anybody of anything, but.
Yeah, I want to sort of veer away from too much speculation there. The internal power struggle, conspiracy theory, probably the most remote of everything that's been tabled so far. However,
the space laser theory is the one doing on X that's the most outlandish. Directed energy weapons were used to bring down the helicopter. People are pointing to the fact that there were two other helicopters in the same flight that landed safely.
But it's my understanding those two helicopters were diverted to early in the flight path to another city, and they split. So that sort of that explains that. So then that also raises the question: why would the presidential helicopter be allowed to fly on its own in difficult conditions and terrain? That's a question. I think that's probably the key question in there. I just find the whole thing improbable.
Well, as you know, Patrick, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I do like to question official narratives. And immediately 3 other aircraft crashes come to mind, the origins of which are highly dubious. Senator Paul Wellstone, of course, the only Democrat to vote against the Iraq War, who was verbally threatened by Dick Cheney, and his plane crashed just a week or 2 later. Ron Brown, of course, on the side of a hill in Yugoslavia in the Clinton administration, and John F. Kennedy Jr., who was apparently planning on running for president against George Bush II in the year 2000, when he met a watery end in the North Atlantic off Martha's Vineyard. So plane crashes are not always accidents.
That's right. Yep. John F. Kennedy Jr. could have been the next Democratic nominee. Who knows? So I don't know. I'd love to get the odds on a future engagement with you, Basil, to go and look at some of the presidential odds for some of these candidates. They got the VP races as well. You've got the Michelle Obama sort of thing rearing its head again. Roger Stone's prediction. So yeah, I know the odds on some of these on the political betting side. Would love to get your analysis on a future segment.
Well, it seems almost ridiculous now that people took that QAnon business seriously, that John F. Kennedy Jr. was somehow still alive and coming back. I mean, that's been memory hole now, but goodness knows where that originated from. One last rather...
Telegram.
On
Telegram.
Yeah. One last rather troubling headline before we go. Russia is beginning nuclear weapon drills near the Ukraine border. Exercises in the use of tactical nuclear weapons are being interpreted as a warning to the West not to escalate tensions further. But it seems that's what London and Washington are determined to do, Patrick.
Tactical nuke drills, yeah, like for like. It's a response to NATO's escalation. The comments by Victoria Nuland. I mean, when is that woman going to retire and put us out of our misery? I mean, she is rearing her head, wanting to start another war with Russia. Hasn't she done enough already? And on top of that, she probably had too many cookies herself, Basil. But anyway, we'll have to follow up on some of these stories as we move ahead. Basil Valentine, the political editor here at TNT, Today's News Talk. Really appreciate you laying out the world update for us this week. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick.
There he goes. That is Basil Valentine, political editor at Today's News Talk. And also a big thank you to our other guest in the first hour, Taylor Hudek, a great independent journalist, giving us an update on Julian Assange's appeal. I hope we've covered everything today, folks. Great to have you all with us. Hello to everybody in the TNT chat community. We'll do it again tomorrow. Take care, you guys. Stay on the network, though. State of the Nation coming up on the other side of the top of the hour. News headlines. Signing out, folks. Take care.